Another edition here of Getting There with Goz, where we talk about the career journeys of business owners, athletes, coaches, media members, and more. When I first launched the podcast, the non-traditional media venue, The Route, this was one of the first people I reached out to because of the success that he had with his business. And we'll get to that through this journey. But for those who don't know you, I like to refer to you as Mr. Belts by Dan. But maybe a proper introduction. I'll let you take the floor for those who don't know. Tell us a little bit about who you are, where you grew up, and what you wanted to be when you were 5, 6, 7 years old.
Well, for people who don't know me, my name is Dan Van Alst. People might know me online as Belt Fan Dan or Belts by Dan. Originally, I am from New York City, bounced around between Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens. Most of my childhood was spent in Howard Beach, Queens, and started high school down there, and then came up here and graduated from Shaker High School in Latham. Then I did what's usually referred to as 13th grade at Shaker, which is Hudson Valley Community College. And, college really wasn't for me at that time in my life. And I was bouncing around jobs. I had interest in computers, so I did certifications on my own. And then I was working at Home Depot for years, and then doing the certification stuff and the computer stuff at night. And then eventually I got an entry-level clerk job with the state, and the state has benefits through the union to pay for college or tuition reimbursement. So I was working overnights. I was working Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 6 at night to 6 in the morning. And I started doing school, and eventually I got my degree, and I've been moving up ever since then. But that was about professional life as far as building a foundation for a family, for a future. But since a young age, my passion was always wrestling belts. The first wrestling event I ever went to was actually SummerSlam 91 in Madison Square Garden. And as a kid, Bret Hart was my favorite wrestler. And at SummerSlam 91, I got to see Bret Hart win the Intercontinental Championship from Mr. Perfect. And, that's one of those moments in your life that you're going to always look back on it and you can pinpoint it. Like, that's the moment I fell in love with wrestling, and specifically belts, and specifically the classic Intercontinental belt. And for anyone who's not familiar with what I'm speaking about.
By the way, on the YouTube side, Dan is now getting up. And this is why, if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, you need to check out our YouTube side to subscribe. He is pulling out one of the all-time, if not the greatest wrestling belt of all time right now. Look at that.
This is the classic Intercontinental WWF Championship made by Reggie Parks, but it's the wrestlers that make the belt or make the championship. And the design is classic in its own. And then you think about all the historic matches and all the Hall of Fame wrestlers that have held it. And it just adds to the prestige of the title. So, growing up like every kid, I would make my own belts out of cardboard. And back in the day, there was this thing called AOL, America Online. And they used to send you about a dozen CDs in the mail. You'd get 1,000 hours. You have a stack of like 30,000 hours of free AOL. Those CDs made perfect side plates. You get a little Sharpie marker, you draw on them, and like it added some bling to it. And that would be your homemade belt, some cardboard, some tinfoil, and some AOL CDs, and you were made. And I was a wrestling fan my whole life. I'd go to shows downstate. And when I moved up here, some of the shows around here, some of the local shows, and then Ring of Honor became real big. And a couple of friends I knew were training with some of the ROH wrestlers. So we would do weekend trips down to Manhattan and to New Jersey, like all the early ROH shows at the Rexplex. We would do road trips for that. And, I got the bug, but I never did the actual in-ring training. I was more of like a fan. And I always, had the bug to do professional wrestling, but I never did do it. And I later got into jiu-jitsu. I was working out at Gold's Gym in Latham, and I saw, well, back then it was Gold's, now it's Event. They had the kids classes going on, and I asked one of the guys at the desk about it. I said, hey, you offer adult classes? I've been seeing that. Looks great. Guy says, "Oh no, this is only kids classes, but I know this guy in Troy who does jujitsu and MMA at night, and come on over, take a free class." So I started going down that route where, to stay active. I was getting tired of doing weightlifting, and it can become redundant in a while. You need to switch it up. So I started doing jujitsu and kickboxing in Troy, and that kind of got that competitive edge out of me. But at the same time, I wanted that creative output or that creative, display. And so what I started doing was collecting replica belts. Like what's behind me are the real handmade belts. But if you go to any show, you see the replicas, the mass produced, and I would buy them and sell them and flip them. And what would happen is, just like anytime you buy anything online, it's never as it's described. The pictures make it look brand new. You get it in the mail, missing paint, missing stones. This is broke. A snap is broke. So I started fixing them. So eventually I would fix them, flip them, repaint them, sell them. And soon enough, people started asking me for advice. I got this belt, it's broken. How do I fix it? Okay. Then the next step was, hey, you seem to know a lot about this. Can you do a new leather strap for me? I don't know a lot about leather. So I had to read and I had to buy books on leather, because back then, YouTube wasn't what it was now. If you want to learn to do anything, you can, take 10 minutes, learn YouTube, and you know it. I was still starting out in the time before that, where it was trial and error, where you had to buy the books, you had to do your research, and you had to really get deep into it before you start learning from your mistakes. So what I would do is I would work my day job. I would come home. I'd do hour kickboxing. I'd travel to Cohoes to do an hour of jujitsu. And then I'd travel home and I'd be in my basement all night working on leather straps, trying to learn the styles of how to do the leather tooling and how to replicate the belts behind me. And there's nothing on wrestling belts out there, but what it is, it's really basic leather craft taken from old style saddle makers. So it's just applying the techniques that they do and fitting it into the belts. So I started doing the releathering on the replicas, and then more and more people are like, I want a custom belt. I want this, I want that. You seem really knowledgeable. Why don't you take a step into that? And then it just kind of got step by step into there, where like I took that first big step into getting plates made and buying designs and then having an artist do. And then it was on me to learn some of the aspects of the computerized artwork and metal work. Like, it's all trial by fire. It's like, I don't know what I'm doing, kind of like a fake it till you make it thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, you really have to have the confidence in yourself, because like you can put on that front that everything, but when somebody puts you up to it, now it's time to back up what you do. And that's what I had to do. I talked to a lot of people about metalwork. I talked to a lot of people about computer artwork, vector artwork, and then plating. So I'm a master of none of these skills, but I know a little about everything in order to produce the items behind me.
Yeah, and there's so many things that have happened there. Like I love using the quote from Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank that says, if it's a hobby, you're not making money, but it becomes a business when you start making money. And for you early on, it is a hobby. It's a passion that you have. You just love doing these things, but these opportunities come. And I'm glad you mentioned these two things, that the pressure where all of a sudden you have customers or people relying on you. And this is any small business owner or someone who's trying to find a way to make money off of something they absolutely love. There is pressure of, like an athlete, stepping up to the plate, going into the game. Are you going to strike out or are you going to perform? And I'm sure this part happens with you a ton during this process, the frustration, because you're trying to learn something new. And it could have been so easy so many times for you to just say, man, I just worked 2 hours in the gym. I just worked a full-time job. I am not spending time on this because I'm not getting it. You had to have those battles with yourself internally often in this early start of your process of building these belts.
There was a lot of money spent on the trial and error phase, where I would buy really nice pieces of leather and I would do my tooling or my stamping of the design. and a slip of a hand, the hammer hit in the wrong spot, or I hit the tool, and it would ruin a strap. And it's like, you just wasted not only the price or the cost of the material, but I put 6 to 8 hours into some of these straps, and the last thing you want to do is mess up at the end to a point where you can't recover, and then you have to start all over. But talking about my background between jiu-jitsu and MMA, the jiu-jitsu has taught me the patience, that it's a life skill that you take and you put into different aspects of your life, where jiu-jitsu teaches patience, and certain times you're waiting, or you're setting up something and setting a trap and waiting for that opening. With the leather work, you're not rushing it. The leather is a material that you can form and mold in a specific way, and if you try to do it too fast or too hard, it's not going to react the way you want. So you have to be delicate, and you have to mold it in a way to be gentle, but at the same time make it do what you want.
No, it absolutely makes sense. So for you, you're continuing to get more customers. You're continuing to have this. Is there a moment? Is it a year? What happens when you're having a full-time job and you see the shift of, a lot more time is starting to go to the belts than what my other job is at this point?
Right. It really was a double-edged sword, because for a lot of people who might not be familiar with me specifically, I've known Conrad Thompson for probably over 10 years. I knew Conrad when he was just a mortgage guy. He was just
All right. So I don't want to interrupt you. Yeah, I don't want to interrupt you, but I think we need to sit on that. For those who don't know, do you mind explaining a little bit of the Conrad Thompson relationship, how you guys built that for over a decade plus?
Right. Like I was saying earlier, I would buy belts, I would repair them, and I would sell them back off. And then slowly, being a wrestling fan, I would travel to these conventions, and a lot of the older wrestlers at the time were hard up on money. So some of them would have old belts, old ring used belts at their table signing autographs. And you just strike up a conversation with some of these wrestlers. It's like, hey, you ever think about selling that? And a lot of them just blow you off. And then you be respectful. And then maybe a little bit later at the convention, you see them at the bar and you buy them a beer and you strike up a conversation, and you get a few beers in them. It's like, all right, so that belt, I want it. Let's work something out. And that was a thing for several years, going to conventions, making wrestlers valid offers on the ring used belts they would bring with them, and then I would sell them on. If you watch the A&E Hidden Treasures show that aired a few months ago, Dan Lambert, who owns American Top Team, he has a beautiful office with all of his belts are ring used. The stuff behind me are handmade copies exactly the way they are. Dan Lambert's collection is all of the stuff that was used in the ring. Fortunately enough, for years, I acquired many of those belts on his behalf. So I started becoming known as a guy who can get ring used belts, who has access to some rare belts. And I got an email from a Conrad Thompson who said, hey, my friend mentioned your name as somebody who might be able to get contacts or acquire some of these belts for me. This is what I'm looking for. This is the ring used stuff I collect. If you can help me out, let me know. And that's where our relationship started. Just a simple email. And a few months pass by and something pops up that happened to be on his list, and send him an email, get him a call. And then, we started a business relationship, and then he started coming to the conventions too. And coming to the conventions, you meet people in person, you have a few drinks, sit down, talk about your wrestling, and you make that in-person connection that you really can't do through the computer. And that's where our friendship really started. And eventually, at one of the conventions, he came up to me and he said, hey, I think I'm going to sit in on this podcast with Ric Flair. And I was like, oh, that's an awesome opportunity. And then he started sitting in on the Ric Flair podcast. And then he talked about Bruce Prichard, who people might not know was Brother Love in WWF back in the 80s and 90s, but he had more responsibilities behind the scenes. So he was a really influential person in what the goings on of WWF during what many people consider to be the golden years and the Attitude Era. So Conrad said, "Hey, we're going to be starting a podcast. We're looking for sponsors. I think you're ready to take the next step into doing this belt thing. Why don't we work out a deal?" And I never intended on doing belts as a business. Like Belts by Dan was never supposed to be a business. It was just a side hobby where I could use my skills to either acquire belts for myself to own or to make that side money so I can buy the belts that I want. And, Conrad's very influential and very business savvy. And he kind of set my head straight on, hey, you have a skill that many people want and many people don't have. There's a huge demand out there for what you do. Why don't you give it a go? So I started advertising on Something to Wrestle with Bruce Prichard podcast. And I haven't advertised on that podcast in maybe 4 years. And every day I still get emails from listeners saying, hey, I heard your ads on the podcast. You're the guy to go to for custom belts. We want a belt for this. We want a belt for that. Let's get rolling on it. So it's, like I said, a double-edged sword because I'm getting the success I want, but I was not ready for it. The amount of orders and the amount of people that come to me asking for belts, it's not something I was expecting to get, especially so, even though I've been doing it for so long, Belts by Dan is only a few years old. So I'm at the point where I don't advertise. I don't have to advertise. I guess that's a thing like every small business owner wants. You want the people to come to you, but at the same time, the people that do come to you, you don't want to take on more orders than what you can handle. So, I have certain time frames, and I don't want people waiting too long. So either I will refuse an order, I will recommend them to somebody else, but coming with that, I have to raise my prices, and certain companies have priority. So like when a major television company or a major celebrity contacts me for a belt, it's understood that, they get to jump the line. Some people's belts, they can wait. And then there's some people who have television deadlines, and that's when the stress hits. That's when it's working all hours of the night. And that's when you really have to dig down deep and get the job done.
And just to sit on that, Something to Wrestle with, let's give the plug to Conrad and Bruce because the podcast is amazing. And this podcast, Getting There with Goz, is 100% directly influenced by what Conrad and Bruce have done. So if they do listen, thank you. You've influenced a young media member to follow some of the things you guys have done. And you see some of the sponsors on our YouTube side. You hear it on our audio side that I've been able to learn a little bit from you. One of my first people I called when I did this to learn about certain ways in which you can have success with podcast advertising. I'm happy to say it's working. So thank you, Dan, for helping me through this. I feel like a lot of businesses, and you were in this spot before, there is here when we're recording in August of 2021, this battle between traditional media, radio, television, newspapers, and non-traditional media advertising, where it's podcasts and social media and all these different ways in which to influence people. I feel like for you, even though that's your friend and your buddy and Conrad, there had to be a thought of you didn't know what was going to happen, but you were happy you were on this wave of success. It feels like businesses who jump on this non-traditional stuff in the right way are going to take advantages of people who don't want to. Risk isn't even the right term. People who just aren't familiar with it. That's what it is. It's like a comfort thing for many of these businesses to dive into this.
Right. It's a whole new avenue of marketing as far as a business goes. Like traditional media, like newspaper, radio, advertisements, even television, that's playing to a certain demographic. But now you have to realize the younger and younger generations, it's Twitter, it's Facebook, it's Instagram, it's TikTok, it's streaming media. Like it's short attention span type of media. Like people are consuming things in a digital way, but in short spurts. So as a business, as any business, you need to learn to adjust. Like I've kind of feel myself old. Like I'm trying to get the hang of TikTok, and it's like I don't get it. But then like there's the kids, there's like 12-year-olds making 6 figures a month because they can do a TikTok dance, or and like, old guy like me, like I don't consider myself old, but realizing like I don't know how to TikTok, and I'm sitting there trying to teach and I have my wife trying to help me out with like how to use a hashtag and how I can link my YouTube channel through my TikTok. And it's a learning curve. It's a steep learning curve. And I think for people like us who kind of grew up in that middle range between where it was traditional media and then this new digital age, you either have to adapt or you're going to be left in the dark.
And I'll add to that in saying that because your clientele, your base, are wrestling fans, and I say this as a compliment, but it might come off as a diss. Professional wrestling fans are incredibly passionate, and social media is their platform where they share the passion. And I'm sure you've dealt with this where even when you're trying to have fun or engaging conversation with wrestling fans, especially on Twitter, you probably find yourself at times ready to jump through the keyboard and say, I don't want to deal with these people anymore.
Right. Everybody has the keyboard warrior mentality. I think back in the day in the school ground, if you said something wrong, there was a fight. If you were disrespectful to somebody, there was consequences for it. Now in this digital age, everybody's behind a screen. There's no actual consequence for your actions. So people will talk to you and say things to you that are really disrespectful or really rude that they wouldn't have the confidence to say in person. So part of that, you have to learn how to deal with it. And sometimes the best way to get at a troll is troll a troll. And personally, I'm attacked a lot because of certain stances I take on counterfeiting in the hobby, which is a huge thing. Like there's people overseas that steal my designs and resell them, and I'm not a fan of that, and I don't approve of the people who do that. But that makes me a target to some people who support that. So instead of stooping down to their level and using the insults, you just throw facts at them. And it's kind of like the lawyer line of questioning, where you're always going to ask them a question that you already know the answer to. You just want to set that trap. You want to be patient, and you want to just keep stringing them along until they make themselves look stupid. So when you're on Twitter and somebody's trolling you and you try to engage in a civil, factual-based conversation with them, and you see all of their replies are either taking shots at you, and then suddenly it's this tweet no longer exists. That's when you know you got the best of them. I didn't have to insult you. I just had to ask you the right lines of questioning to make you prove that you're not as educated about the topic as you think you are. You made a fool out of yourself, and now you're trying to cover your tracks. So when you're engaging in trolling on Twitter, or you're getting trolled, take screenshots of everything, because that makes it even more fun. Because when they delete the tweets, then you can go back and post it and be like, you just post. You don't have to do any of the work. You just post a tweet, and your followers are the ones who will pick up and kind of do. They'll what you want them to say. They'll say it. They'll point out. They can see right through it. So
I'm sure.
That's a mind game. Twitter.
No doubt. And I'm sure this next question you gave me like an hour answer on, but you've mentioned it already. So many people are trying to buy belts, whichever way they're trying, through the internet and more. Right. Easy answer. Because I'm sure you could give me days upon days of detail. If someone is looking for a belt, what's the best easy advice you can give them of this could be a fraud, beware?
Right. The big issue right now is you want a belt. What do? You either go to Amazon, you either go to eBay, you go to your traditional or your new age digital marketplaces. And unfortunately, most of those marketplaces are just filled with counterfeits. So the advice I would give for people either looking to get into the belt hobby or purchase some belts, if there's classic belts that you want, your best bet is like looking for the official replicas sold by like WWE Shop or the Figures Toy Company. If you're looking for a custom belt, like the big thing right now exploding is fantasy football belts. Everybody wants a belt for fantasy football. There are a ton of companies out there that make them. They're all different prices, all different budgets, but you have to remember, you get what you pay for. You can get a fantasy football belt for $100. You can get a fantasy football belt for $1,000. There's going to be a huge difference between the both of them. Now, it all depends on, you might have 12 people in your fantasy football league, if you get everybody to throw in $100 and you pass the belt around every year, you can make that a worthwhile investment. Or you get $100 belt. That way, you can go out and play with it and bang it up and do all the fun stuff you do while you watch football with it and not worry about damaging it. So there is a market for everybody and every belt collector. It's just you have to be careful with people who are trying to pull one over you by posting pictures of a belt that is not going to be the same thing that you get in the mail. If the price is too good to be true, if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. And unfortunately, the eBays, the Facebook marketplaces, the Amazons, they don't go and patrol it. It's up to the owners of the intellectual property to go after them. And WWE has more important things to do than take down 1,000 eBay auctions a day. So buyer beware.
Yeah, it's a great advice there, especially I'm glad you mentioned fantasy football. When we're taping this, so many leagues are getting ready to either start up for the first time or find something fun for a trophy or a belt or a cash prize, whatever it is. And to have that advice, I'm glad people listen to this podcast because they're going to make sure hopefully they save some money when they could have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars more on something they really didn't realize they were buying. Now, this is a business and you're working with people you could share or you don't have to. Have you had a moment yet where your phone rang, a direct message came on social media, and someone either you grew up following, cheering for, you followed their careers, said they wanted to work with you and you're willing to share that story with us?
There are a few wrestlers that I've had the privilege of dealing with. A couple I can't talk about right now because they're actually works in progress. But it's
you can say tough. No. You can say no if you want. We're like, look, I got to protect my clients, guys. I got to do that. It's fine.
Right. I won't mention the wrestlers' names themselves just because like there's things going on. But the biggest thing to date right now, personally to me, was doing belts for the New York Yankees and then doing the belts for New Japan. Like I've done belts for AEW, I've done WWE belts, I've done belts for many celebrities, but like you would never like I grew up as a Yankee fan, lifelong Yankee fan, family of Yankee fans, and then I get an email from the minor league team, the Rail Riders. The Rail Riders wanted a player of the game belt, so I'm dealing with them, and then the guy I'm dealing with from the Rail Riders says, "Hey, the Yankees too want a belt. Maybe we can make some kind of package." I'm like, "Yeah, that's great." And then I start texting somebody in the Yankees locker room, and they're like, "Can you mock up something?" Okay, mock up something. The guy has his phone in the clubhouse with all of the players there, and they're just showing my design to all of the New York Yankees, and they're, I like that. Can we put this there? Can we change that? And it's like they're critiquing my belt live on a phone live, and it's like, how do you like react? Like you're not prepared for that. Like, what do you do? And it's funny too because the player of the game belt I did for the Yankees several years ago, they still use it, but Tommy Canley had a lot of input on that belt, which is funny because I graduated from Shaker and he graduated from Shaker, and it was, we didn't go at the same time, but it's one of those weird things where like life kind of comes full circle. Like two Shaker, I'm making a belt for the Yankees. He wanted me to make him the classic WWF belt, the Winged Eagle, the belt that Hogan and Brett and Ric Flair held, and I can't replicate it, but we could do something similar. And then I showed some custom designs, and they really liked the custom design, so that's what we went with on that.
I was laughing. I couldn't contain my laughter. I'm sure it's staying with me. You felt, we're like, is this really my phone? Did they call the wrong number when you're going through the Yankee locker room and seeing all these players? No doubt.
Right. It's unreal. And, you ride the wave, and it's like, all right, there's highs and lows because, every client isn't going to be the New York Yankees. You have to really get down and you have to do the work. You have to do the dirty work. Like for every New York Yankee type of belt I do, I'm doing 30 belts that are never going to see the light of day. but those clients are just as important because they're paying their hard-earned money for my product, and I want them to be happy. So none of the big companies are going to come to me. None of the celebrities come to me without me putting the work and effort in to those average collector belts. So it's important as far as a business goes that you have to take the time for your VIP clients, but you need to treat all of your clients as a VIP in some way. You can't forget where you came from.
No doubt. And we've had this big boom here in 2021 where for somebody like myself who grew up in the Monday Night Wars in the mid 90s and became a wrestling fan because of that, I hope younger fans of wrestling are living through this era and become lifelong wrestling fans. That can happen. But in particular for your business, because you're doing what you do in this boom, what are your hopes for the future of what can happen for you? I'm not asking you to make a prediction like Paul Heyman here. Like, I'm just asking, like, what do you hope for the future?
I think the last week in professional wrestling is going to go down as a historic point as far as bringing in a new era. So we grew up in the Monday Night War. You had WWF back then, WCW, and then there was ECW, which had a huge influence on the Monday Night War. And I've kind of got into it with Eric Bischoff a few times about that, but that's a story for a different day. But now what we've seen over the last week with the return of CM Punk and AEW's continuing to give fans what they want, they're keeping it simple. It's professional wrestling is not a hard business. You have good guys, you have bad guys, you have a reason, a conflict in which why they struggle, and then you have a winner. And then they fight over these belts. So it's real simple. WWE sometimes tries to make things a little bit too complicated for their own good, and it gets lost. It gets lost in translation. Sometimes simple is better, but there's that lapsed fan, that people who like, oh, I haven't watched wrestling in 5 or 6 years. I haven't watched wrestling in 10 years. I kind of outgrew it. And then you see something like CM Punk's return show up on all your social media, and you hear the reaction of the crowd. And even if you're not a wrestling fan, you're like, there's 15,000 people going crazy for this guy. What is it about? What's so special about him? And then that gets new fans or the lapsed fan going down that dark hole of YouTube searching late at night, like, what is this guy? And that's how it builds momentum. And I think we're going to see a new, not necessarily a Monday Night War, but I think finally we're going to see some legitimate competition to WWE. And just like what happened in the Monday Night War, I think both companies are going to start putting their best foot forward. And when you have competition like that, it's the fans who win because they're getting all of the stuff they want to see. They're getting stuff they never expected to see. And that is the best part about being a fan.
I hope it's that plus your business booms as well. Where all of a sudden, if you think wrestling belts are popular now, wait for 6 months or a year or 2 or 3 years from now, business will continue to boom for you, I hope too.
Right. I'm loving that too. Like I have opportunities I never thought about. It's companies all over the world. Like I got to recently do a few belts for New Japan Pro Wrestling, and everyone asks, like, when you get into the belt business, you want to make a belt for WWE. You want a belt on WrestleMania, and I haven't had a belt. I haven't made the WWE belt, the championship belt yet. Hopefully that's something down the line. But New Japan Pro Wrestling is the WWE of Japan. They have the history, the tradition, and there's many people who think that New Japan is more prestigious as far as holding that championship than the WWE championship. And they contacted me. So not only is it a foreign company contacting an American-based company, I'm just a guy in Latham, New York, and I'm getting calls all hours of the night from people who heard my name from someone they trust and going through translators, trying to get everything done. Now, how much would it cost? What is the time frame? And like, okay, we're going to be replacing our major belt. We want you to do the new belt. What? Like, as a belt collector, the last New Japan belt, we call it the V4, probably one of my favorite belts of all time. So number one, you're replacing something you love, and number two, you say wrestling fans are very passionate. They're very passionate, but they don't like change. So I knew from day one, I'm replacing one of the most loved belts of all time. It doesn't matter how good my belt is. It doesn't matter if 10 years from now, it's the belt that everyone loves. When it debuts, it's going to get hated. So it was kind of a bittersweet moment when I did that new belt for New Japan, because you talk about the Twitter trolls, you talk about taking the good, the bad. The reception for it was overwhelmingly negative. And as a craftsman, you have to deal with that. You have to put a smile on your face, and you have to kind of not lash out at that. You have to go in a factual way. People like, well, it's an ugly design. Okay, well, that's up to you. That's a personal preference. And then you get people, saying bad things about the quality. Well, that's something I can talk to you about. I can explain to you. All right. New Japan is very traditional. So every aspect of the belt has a deeper meaning to that. And New Japan, a few days later, put out a big press release explaining all the differences. And I didn't have anything to do with that. They had a professional painter paint up a watercolor drawing of the belt, and they sent it to me, and they said, "We need you to replicate this." And all the details were written in Japanese, so I needed help with the translator in order to understand some of the different aspects and many of the parts of the belt. And then once you start learning or reading about the reasons why are these colored stones here? What does the symbolism and the representation of each aspect of the belt? And you start getting a greater appreciation for it. So now it's up to me as not only the belt maker, but kind of a historian trying to parlay this information to someone who just saw this belt debut on TV, and the first thing they want to say is it looks like Cody Rhodes' neck tattoo. So it's you have to take the good with the bad, and you also have to understand the level of the person you're interacting with. Like if they're a diehard wrestling fan, you have to hit them up at a different, deeper level compared to just somebody who's just trying to troll you.
But you have this fascinating perspective on this, because I think on the American side, for those who are not as familiar with the New Japan Pro Wrestling stuff, and I had heard these stories and follow you on social media, so I knew some of the story of the background, but the one that kept jumping in my mind, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, was SummerSlam a few years ago when it was Seth Rollins and Finn Balor when the Universal title debuted for the first time. And I believe that crowd really never gave that match a chance because they were so upset about the belt the entire match. I don't know how much, if at all, you want to offer perspective on that, because I feel like it's like a kicker in football. You always root for the fellow position, and you feel like what's better for your business is better for everybody. But do you have any take on what happened years ago on that American side of it?
Well, when the Universal belt debuted, I think a lot of people had hopes for a new design. So the first thing that really disappointed fans was they just took the WWE Championship and they put it on a different color strap. Well, the color strap was red, so everyone's referred to it as the fruit roll-up belt for a little bit because it was so bright and it was so red. And that belt got hated on relentlessly for a long time. And the person who makes the belts for WWE Wildcat, his name is Andrew. I've probably known him almost 20 years. Like even before I was a belt maker, I was still an enthusiast and a collector, and we would talk about belts. And legitimately, he's probably the nicest guy I have ever talked to in the belt hobby, and nothing but success for him. And he's very class. Like people are not going to like every product you put out. There's going to be some duds, and the way you can handle the negative feedback says a lot about you as not only an individual but as a business. So you got to understand, when like I tweet from the Belts by Dan, that's not just me. That's me representing my brand. And even though I'm a individual, some people have multiple people behind the scenes working for them. So you have to be careful on that social media when you're interacting with people, because it's not just your name out there. It's a business, it's a brand, and it's other people who might not necessarily share the same opinions as you. So you have to be a little bit more well thought out in your replies.
It's
But
great.
Andrew took it with great stride, and you work on to the next one, and the next belt he made was very well received. So you learn from the mistakes and go on. But unfortunately, with someone like WWE, and same thing with like New Japan, we don't have any control over the design. We can offer our advice, we can offer our critiques as professional belt makers, and we can tell them, hey, you might want to soften this edge up, because if the wrestler bends over, this point is going to, poke them right in the gut. They might not like it. Or this is a weak spot where, you hit a wrestler over the head, it's going to crack. So we can offer our perspective there. But at the end of the day, when you're dealing with these major companies, these are multi-million dollar, even billion-dollar companies. All right. Who am I to tell them, no, this is not going to work? You need to be very flexible when you're dealing with these companies. They have a vision. They have an idea of what they want as the final product, and they're coming to you as a business to turn that into a reality. And if you can't do that, they're going to find somebody else who could.
No, it's absolutely great advice, working all across the board there and finding out how those things come together. And it is getting there with Goz. And the hope of this podcast is that if you're young, if you're a wrestling fan, maybe you're listening to this podcast, you said, whoa, making belts could be my career 10 years from now, 15 years from now. I can't get in the ring. What's your best advice for young wrestling fans or young people who want to start their own business and follow the passion like you did to get to where you are in your career right now?
Right. I will say this to this isn't even based about age. It's not even about young people. It can be about old people. With the way the internet and social media, you can be your own boss. Okay. If you have the confidence and you believe in yourself enough, you're going to fail along the way. You need to learn from those failures and you need to move on. But everybody has one or two things in their life they're passionate about, something that they really like, something that they showed real interest in. My advice to anyone there is you have to turn that passion into a business, something that you're going to eat, sleep, breathe, something that you think about all the time. Learn as much as you can about it. Ask as many questions as you can. Don't take no for an answer. You're going to be told no 1,000 more times than you're going to be told yes. You can't take it personally. Take the next step. Keep moving forward. Keep moving forward. The difference between you and everyone else is you're not taking no for an answer. You're going to keep going forward. And that doesn't matter. If you're 86 years old and you want to start something new, do it. If you're 12 and you're in grade school and you want a side gig, take it up. You got YouTube. You have all of the information and all of the experience from everyone in the world at your fingertips. Take advantage of it. All right. Put the video games down. Watch some instructional videos on something that you have an interest in. It'll snowball from there.
I've done 75 episodes of this podcast in about 6-7 months, and I'm going to copy and paste that answer from you. And I'm going to tell a lot more people of that in the future. And hopefully some young college student or a high school student is looking to do sports talk or media or whatever it might be. That is great advice. And you already know this, but I want to say it one more time. You've offered me some incredible advice through this process. I'm thrilled I finally got to do this with you because other people now get to hear the advice you've given me. I thank you one more time, and I cannot wait to root for you and your business going forward to see where you guys go next.
Well, I appreciate it. And, I've been a big fan of you for years on the radio. And it's funny because I feel like I know you just from the radio for years, but this is really one of the first times we've spoken one-on-one. So I'm really happy for you, all the stuff you're doing with Goz Media. Huge supporter, and you're going to have success because the advice I give or I just gave, you're already doing it. So I don't need to give you the advice. You have the passion and you're going forward with it. So I know there's going to be good things for you in the future.
Dan, I appreciate the time, man. Make sure to follow him on social media. Continue. Good luck in the future. And who knows, maybe at a wrestling show here in Albany, it'll be you and I driving the beer truck in. Stone Cold will be in the back. We'll make our own wrestling moment here in Albany like the other legendary ones in the past.
Awesome.
All right, man. I'll catch you later.
All right.